the HSC process, the sales process, how to sell anything in three simple steps. And today we're going to talk about sort of the second step in the HSC process. And if you remember, if you've seen some of the previous videos, and if you haven't, go back and start with number one. It'll make a lot more sense. But what we're talking about is the HSC model. Again, hook, which we talked about last time. And today we're going to talk about story, and then in the future one we'll talk about close. But so story is one of the critical parts in marketing. As we talked about, marketing is about changing beliefs. In the sales process, these first two are about marketing, and this last one is about sales, getting somebody to act. And so today we're going to focus on how to use story to change somebody's beliefs. Because, as I mentioned in the previous video, if we can get somebody to change their beliefs so that they believe that whatever we're selling is much more valuable to them than the money in their pocket, then it's a no-brainer sale. And, the biggest reason salespeople hate to sell, and, quite frankly, a lot of people don't like to be sold, and because they feel like they're being pushed, they feel like somebody's trying to cram something down their throat, is because the salespeople forget about these first two steps, the marketing part. If you forget about the marketing and go straight to the sales part, you're going to fail almost every time. And it's uncomfortable for the salesperson, and it's uncomfortable for the prospect who's being sold. So that's why these first two steps are so critical to do that. So let's talk about story for a minute. Story is again part of marketing that is all about changing beliefs. And so I'm going to just from definitions, so we're on the same page. Beliefs are really, I would say, how we see the world as individuals. And so how we see things, what do we believe about the world? But even deeper than beliefs, and we'll get into this in a future video because it's even more powerful, is identity. And identity can be, is built on beliefs, but identity is sort of how we see ourselves. And when it comes to identity, it's like identity is so powerful that it's its own topic. And again, we'll get to that in a future video. But just for now, just know that that's in the future. But so what we're going to talk about today is using story and how to build beliefs and how to shift beliefs. Why would we use story? You think about it, when we're children, do our parents, whether you're a parent or not, everybody's been a child, so that, what's one of the most ineffective way if you want to teach your child, it's not good to lie or you shouldn't steal. If we just lecture them and say, don't do that, it's usually pretty ineffective. But if we can tell them a story, we can talk to them about, the boy who cried wolf, and how he cried so many times that after a while nobody listened to him, nobody took him serious, i.e. he lost trust because he lied. Then suddenly, the child starts to understand those things and they remember those things, and that gets in their psyche. And so, that's where the whole idea of moral of the story is. I have young girls, and of course, with all the fairy, type of stories and everything, you read these different books for kids, and I remember there's one about colored pencils, and the colored pencil brown, and how he was sad because he had no friends and felt like anybody didn't like him, and he was, in the pencil box, nobody used him, he was the tallest one because nobody used the color brown, everybody used red and green and whatever. And what is the whole book about? It's about how, the reason he didn't have any friends is because he wasn't being a good friend. And so one of the other pencils is teaching him, hey, if you want to be a good friend, when green over there is sad, go over there and encourage them, or if red over there is happy, or excited, go over there and be excited with them, be a good friend. And so it's all about how to be a good friend. And of course, they're using, colored pencils and inanimate object, to make a point. But again, the children remember it, and it's much better than lecturing them about you should support your friends, you should be nice to them, you should, cry with them, laugh with them, all that kind of stuff that we would lecture somebody with. But if we tell it in story format, people accept it a lot more easily. So, and it really goes back to the basics of how our brains work too, because our brains think in terms of pictures, and we think in terms of story. Think back, to your childhood or in high school. you have certain stories that you remember, certain sequence of events, images and everything. And your brain puts those together, and that's largely how you make decisions in the future. That's why, a lot of times we'll look at people and go, how did they make that decision? Or, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. And it's because they have different experience. They had different stories than we did. So they view things differently. So again, how do we use this for us? For in our business, in sales, we need to be able to shift their beliefs from maybe what they're currently thinking about our product, our service, the solution, the problem that they're facing, and change it so they're thinking more along the lines of what we're thinking, that it's a good idea that they part with their money for what we've got for them because it's actually going to help them. Once they start believing that, again, it makes the sale super easy. So, we have to do that, or can do that most effectively through story. So, it's, another side note, the reason people think that that sales is a personality and it's not a skill, which is totally wrong, because sales is a skill, it is not a personality. But people think that is because, if you just think about somebody that that is that natural born salesperson. Let me guess, they're outgoing, gregarious, and I bet you anything that they can tell a good story. And some people have a natural knack at that because they like doing it or whatever. And that, because that's part of the HSC model, that gets them a long way in the sales process because they're a good storyteller, or they tell stories. They like to tell stories because, again, it works. So if we want to tell a story, we can do it in a variety of different ways, but there's some things that are really critical in the components of the story. And this is why, like anything in sales, it's got to be thought up front. And that's why scripts are so important. You've got to know what you're going to say and how you're going to say it up front. You can't wing it and decide on the spot what you're going to say, because you'll forget things, and you won't, without that intentional language, that intentional plan, you're going to go off on a tangent. So what do we do? When it comes to stories, what are the kind of some of the things that we want to keep in mind? First, we want to start with a relatable character, because what we're trying to do is show somebody and take them on a journey, help them create a story in their mind of what their life would look like after they've shifted their beliefs and changed the beliefs that are more friendly to what we want them to believe. So if they don't have a relatable character, if we tell them a story about somebody that they have nothing in common with, and they can't relate to that person, then, it's a total waste. So, if we're talking to, somebody who's in the construction industry, and we start telling a story about an attorney, yes, it could work. It depends on the context, of course, but, the point is those are two very different types of, generally, types of, dress and environments and, all that kind of stuff, and so one is not going to relate necessarily to the other. And so it's got to be a relatable character. The character also has to face the same struggles. So in the story, the person has got to face whatever the biggest challenges are that we know the prospect is facing. If we know that their biggest frustration is that they don't have enough time during the day, and we're trying to sell them, some kind of solution which is going to save them time, then we need to show a character and what they were struggling with. They were struggling with the same thing, that they couldn't get anything done because they were just constantly being dragged into different directions and could never get anything done because there just wasn't enough time. There wasn't 25 hours in a day. So if we do that, we show the character struggling with the same thing. Again, it's relatable. And then we take them through that journey where you see that character comes out on the other side of it and sort of sees, how life can be. Sort of, wow, here was Johnny with facing this problem. He thought he was, hopeless and couldn't do anything about it, and yet he used this solution. And then afterwards, his life was so much better. He had no idea that it could be so good. And i.e., he used our product or service or our solution, and bam, his life is much better. And, it goes back to one of those things that psychologically, we can talk until we're blue in the face about how great our product or service is and our company and everything else. And people don't care, quite frankly. They're not even listening to us, and their defenses go up. But if we let them make the decision, if we let them build the story, if we let them tell themselves, that our product or service is better, guess what? They're all in it because they listen to themselves. They don't listen to us. So we got to show them and take them through that character, and we're doing it by proxy through a story, so it's not personal. We can't say to them, hey, here you are, you've got this problem. If you use our thing, it'll solve it, and this will be you, afterwards, and that's better than, some other ways to do it. But the problem with that is that it's a confrontational way versus we're using a third party, and it gets the pressure off the person to feel like, oh, okay, I see somebody else and what they went through, and that makes sense to me. I can do that. So one of the problems with what salespeople do typically is that they ignore the story, and if you ignore the story, people think, oh well, I don't have to worry about that. But guess what? The prospect is making up their own story. So the question is, which would you rather have? Would you rather have the story that they make up in their own mind about you and your solution, or would you rather give them the right information to get them to believe what you believe is the truth about your solution? Because they're going to make it up in their brain anyway, because that's how we think. That's how we make decisions, is by making up stories. They're going to decide, well, based upon what I know about other, products and services that are similar to what this guy is talking about, well, then I'm going to say it's this, this, and this, which may be totally incorrect, from your perspective. And that they're wrong about that. But if you allow them to tell that story to themselves and build that story themselves, it's just as bad because they're talking themselves out of it. So we've got to give them that story. And again, how do we do this, from a practical standpoint, in different platforms or channels? The three big ones I always, sort of divided into, you've got online, of course, you've got phone, and you got in person. So online, what do you do? How do you tell a story online? And by the way, all these things have one thing in common, and you'll pick that up in a second here. When it comes to online, if you have a sales page, you've got plenty of text, and you can kind of show, hey, you can literally write a story about somebody and what they went through. You can have a text testimonial. You can put little tiny testimonials. You can have longer form testimonials, whatever. On the phone, you could tell them a story about, hey, we had this client once that was, struggling with this issue, this challenge or whatever, which happens to be the challenge they're struggling with. And, they went through and they started making changes, and they tried different things, and then they tried our solution, and then bam, they realized, wow, life could be so much better. And so they changed it. And so they started using our solution, and bam, this is what happened to them. Excuse me. And so, again, we're telling them a story about somebody who's similar to them that faced similar things and what they found out. Same kind of thing in person, very similar. And what do these all have in common? There's pseudo testimonials. Online you can put, text testimonials, video testimonials, whatever. On the phone, in person, you're more of telling a story, sort of a third-party testimonial, if you will. You're giving them an example, but in effect, it is a testimonial. So again, remember that what we're trying to do is get the prospect to change the beliefs, their own beliefs, so that they sell themselves on it. Because if we try to push them from the outside, it's not going to work any more than it's going to work lecturing a 7-year-old about lying. We've got to tell them a story and let them come to that conclusion themselves. If we really want to make the sales process good for both parties and we want it to be effective. So that's the second part in the HSC model. I hope this was helpful today. And I always forget when King gets on me, but please subscribe to the channel. We got a lot of great stuff on here, and do all that YouTube share and like and all that good stuff. And I will see you on the next